Quick video on the build of a Dunster House garden office. Be sure to check the video description for the accompanying blog post, which covers far more details around the thought process and why I chose Dunster House and the sorts of things I was looking for. But I had a quick look through their website, found a building that looked pretty good, which was this Helena. I liked it particularly because obviously it came with everything you needed to build it: walls, inner walls, windows, roof, the works. The only thing I had to worry about were the electrics. The spot in the garden was in the top corner where there was already a hot tub. This had the benefit of having a 30 amp power supply already in place, which simplified matters there. So the first thing to do was to drain the hot tub of all that lovely looking water. Once the water was gone, the next thing to do was to rip up all the decking that surrounded it. This was quite a fun job, as you can imagine. Most blokes are pretty good at demolition. And you can see all the amount of crap that had been accumulating under the decking from years of my children throwing things out of the hot tub. Set about trying to get rid of as much stuff as possible, flattening it. There's great big lumps of concrete that all needed to come out, and all these posts gave me a good excuse to get the chainsaw out. And once that was done, I could get a man with a high ab to come in and, with virtually no fuss whatsoever, just lifted this great big tub and it was gone, leaving behind a big muddy patch where the new building was going to go. The red line demarks where I thought I needed a load of concrete. So I started to flatten this down a bit more, got rid of as much as possible, a good 4 or 5 tons in the end. And with that done, I could order a local contractor to come in, pour some concrete, which they duly did, put nice concrete in, which my dog then walked all over. We decided to not put any drainage in, which if you read the blog post you'll realise why I regret. With the concrete in place, the building then arrived on the very same hire that took away my hot tub, funnily enough. It was all nicely packaged. That big container has PVC in it and all the glass for the windows and doors, and everything else was very nicely packaged. There was one small area of damage on one of the upright beams, but inspecting that revealed that it actually wasn't too bad. Then started by laying out the bearers, which gave me a rough idea of the footprint of the building. Turns out I probably sized the concrete just about a little bit too small, but nevertheless could start assembling the bearers and the runners and everything else. Took a lot of time here to make sure that everything was square. This is probably the most important step of the whole build process, because if you can get this flat and square and level, then everything else should flow quite nicely. So take your time on this piece. There's 2 things going on here. Because of the fall that we put in the concrete, I've had to pack one end of it quite a lot with these plastic packets to raise it up to make sure it's flat. The other thing I did was to put DPC under all of the bearers, and I also fabricated some additional brackets just to give it extra strength, so these are drilled completely directly into the concrete. This is the DBC. Now, Dunster House don't recommend or don't suggest that you use this, but I thought this is probably a good idea to make sure that any of these bearers weren't sat in water. You can see there though the difference, the impact of having a 13 metre fall in the concrete from right to left had. But with the base in and flat and level and square and true and everything else, it was then a case of starting to build out the uprights. This is a fairly straightforward and quite a fun job, and work sequentially around installing the uprights in each of the corners. And funnily enough, they're attached to the base with very flimsy little brackets, and so in the early stages it feels like it will never stand up, but as you get further on it quickly develops some good strength. You can see in the end I've had to push the frame all the way tight up against my grass and the decking because I had calculated the size wrong, and on that particular beam you can see the damage that was received, but that will be hidden by the internal walls when I finish building it. These posts go in pretty easily, a few extra brackets here and there to give them a bit of strength, and then you move on to building this wooden lintel. There's 2 of these, one quite big one. This one goes above the main window unit, and then there's a secondary one that goes inside on the top of the porch. It goes above the sliding door unit. Fairly straightforward, just a bit of basic carpentry to put that together. And then you slot them on top of the posts and do your best to keep them square and in the right sort of line as you then screw them together. With the lintel and uprights in place, you can then start attaching the walls. Building will now very quickly start to take shape. This is reasonably straightforward, but I did this all on my own, and so having a bunch of quick clamps did provide the extra pair of hands that is needed to do this. The kit includes these expansion joints that go in between each of the panels, which just gives each of the panels a little bit of give as they change shape and expand over the course of a year. But that does mean you end up with fairly large gaps in between each of your joints, which I went after and filled with silicone. And by this point you started to see the nice clean profile from the outside, and it really does start to look like a very big, very expensive shed. And with the walls done, it is time for the roof. This is definitely a 2 or more person job because these panels are very big and very heavy, 100mm insulated, and they've got plastic and steel and all sorts around them, which makes them very awkward to shift into the right locations. Managed to get a bit of help here, and that wall around the edge certainly aided us in terms of getting the panels into place. It really is just a case of slotting them into the right locations and then attaching this flashing that goes around all of the edges in one big metally mess, and then eventually it starts to take shape and looks a bit like you have a roof that isn't going to leak all over your building. With the roof in place, we set to work on the windows. I've never done anything like this before. This is just another case of patience. You get the plastic PVC frames in place to begin with, and then you install the glass, and then you use plastic packers to try and get the glass level and straight in the windows. The doors are much the same. I went for the sliding door option, very same thing, just on twice the size. Again, a case of getting everything in place and then just trying to get it level. With that done, I started to attach all the exterior trims. So I filled all the gaps I could find with silicone, clear silicone, and then added these exterior trims just to cover up any of the gaps. So that was pretty much the exterior of the building complete now, which meant it was time to move to the inside. I opted to add extra insulation to the walls and to the floor, which is not provided as part of the kit. Never done this before, it's quite fun. You order these panels, you get a big saw and you measure your gaps, you slice it up, you spank it into the hole as best you can. The idea here was to try and keep a regular temperature throughout the year as much as possible. Not too worried about the cold, but trying to control the extremes of heat in the summer. We'll soon find out if that actually does what it's supposed to. And then used some foil tape in the right places just to join everything together. With the insulation in place, I just did a very simple soft fix of the walls to get an idea of what that was going to look like. So these are the panels that they provide you, which themselves are insulated. So the additional insulation is possibly not required. But at least with those walls in place, we could then figure out where I was going to hang some electrics. So hanging out at the top of the wall there is space for a television and also for some lights. And then we've marked out the zone towards the bottom where all the electrics are going to run for the sockets. At this point, I didn't really know where I wanted stuff and electrics to sit, so we just went completely overboard and put cables pretty much everywhere, hoping to cover all bases when it occurred. Took the decision to have the room plastered, didn't take many photos for some reason, so take my word for it that it was then plastered. And when it had been plastered, I got to the job which I hate, which is painting. Painted it this delightful shade of sort of off grey, and all of a sudden this is starting to look like an actual office building. And with that done, we could do some second fix electrics, which included lights. And with the electrics in place and not yet fused, it was time to start doing all the other finishing touches. Started off with getting some carpet installed. Actually opted for tiles in this case, because that was super easy to have installed. And I was doing most of this in the height of summer, where it is in the 30s every day. Quickly realised we needed blinds on the windows, so ordered these nice Venetian style blinds from Blinds Direct. and they fit really nicely into the PVC windows, and I've got these full length hanging ones to cover up the main door, and this really did a good job of taking the temperature off out of the building. I then built a desk using a solid piece of oak kitchen surface and a custom base for it to sit on. Then just started to trim off the edges by, instead of using the wood they supplied for the porch, I used the decking wood to match that, as well as just trimming off the front and the sides. So that was kept nice and neat and tidy. And then around the edge where you can get round to the back of the building, just added in some simple concrete slabs to make that clean. I also added guttering. I was super nervous about water getting under the building, and so I thought one way I could try and avoid some of that was by adding this guttering in a matching anthracite grey, which I got from a local distribution company. Had to fabricate these brackets as the building is really not designed to take normal guttering at all.